Hiya, my name's Brian Houston. I'm an artist out of Belfast, Northern Ireland. I wanted to talk to you about a breakthrough I had in my life about 2.5 years ago. I'd been through a lot of therapy from 2017 after I returned from the United States. I found readjusting to life in Northern Ireland very difficult and reintegrating into the way life was here compared to how it was in the United States, I found emotionally very challenging. And so I started to do a thing called theotherapy. The theory behind that is up until the age of around 7, your worldview is shaped. So your temperament encounters the world, encounters experience, and you learn how to survive. You learn what to say, what not to say, who's powerful, who's weak, and how do you avoid getting hurt. And that shapes your worldview. And then as you get older, probably before the age of around 21 or so, your personality is shaped by your worldview, impacted by your experience. And that begins to solidify in your 20s into your personality and how you deal with the world. My journey from having an alcoholic father and a very, disruptive and to a degree abusive childhood was to default to anger, and my three settings, if you like, were I'm doing okay, a kind of a numb existence, or I'm angry, or I'm raging, right? So three settings, basically cold, hot, or extremely hot. And what I didn't have was the ability to navigate nuance or the emotions that go in between that. And I struggled to understand love and I struggled to express love. I had no difficulty expressing anger and rage. And within the environment I grew up in, it felt much safer for me to be the scariest person in the room than to be the most vulnerable person in the room. And for a long time in my 20s and 30s, there was a lot of doors get slammed, a lot of rooms got walked out of, a lot of yelling, and a lot of, leaving damage in my wake. And I had no idea that how I was behaving was scary to my family and friends and the musicians that I worked with or the churches and church leaders that I interacted with, as well as regular society. And so that all worked for me because that was my survival mechanism, and it worked for me until my 40s when it began to unravel. And I sought help, and I began to get some help. So from 2017 through 2021, I basically went through 3 different therapists, and each person was trying to help me achieve a healing breakthrough. But the last one that I worked with probably for about 2 years, 20 and 21, a lady called Julia from England, I would meet her every Friday on Zoom and we would chat, and it was incredibly helpful to me. But I never experienced major breakthrough. It just helped me stabilize and helped me process stuff so that I didn't behave dysfunctionally in society. But the goal was to achieve a breakthrough. And by the end of 2021, I was becoming concerned that the therapy had become a crutch and that I couldn't function in life without it. And by then, Julia and I were talking about the weather and football, and we had exhausted the deep subjects. And so by mutual agreement, we decided that I would take a break. And at first I thought it would be like for a few weeks, but it ended up becoming all of 2022 and into 2023. And I was fine until one day in March, roughly 2023, I got an email from a lawyer in England that sent me into a spiral of anxiety. And I knew from doing the therapy and from doing some of the training regarding therapy that the last thing I should do would be distract myself, or go for a walk or watch TV or in some way try to press it away or push it away. I knew that the thing to do was to allow it to come and to be present within that anxiety. And it was very, very scary and painful. My skin was burning, my bones were on fire, and I wanted to die because I felt so completely terrified. And it was completely irrational, triggered by an email that had nothing in it. And I knew that this was some kind of emotional event that I was having. And so after I'd experienced it for a while, I don't know how long, I said, what is this that I'm experiencing? And the voice said to me, this is how you felt when you were 5 and your father came home drunk. And I remember holding my brother. We slept in the same bed and we held each other, trembling, being terrified as we heard him come upstairs and go into the bedroom. And we knew it would only be a matter of time before he would say something and we'd hear a swear word and then more, and then violence would erupt and we'd be up all night and there wouldn't be any sleep that night. And that could be a school night. As we got older, it became more and more frequent. It used to be just a Friday and a Saturday night, but it soon became Sunday nights, then eventually Wednesday nights, then Thursday nights, till eventually it was more or less all-out war all the time. That was our childhood, and it was awful. But throughout that time, I never confronted my dad. I always wanted him to love me. I always wanted him to be proud of me and to like me. And I guess looking back on it now, the thing he and I bonded on, the only thing we bonded on, was that he was a massive fan of music. And it's entirely possible that the reason I do music to this day is because that was the one thing that made me feel like I could connect to my dad. But when I was 16, he set me down. There's been the third court order to remove him from our home. And the first two, he had managed to persuade my mom to not enforce. But this third one, this time he had hit me and he had knocked me out. And the police had been called and had been a massive, big scene. And things had taken definitely a turn for the dramatic. And it had gone to a whole other level. And he sat me down in the chair. He had his stuff piled up in the street outside. It was 17th of December, I think. I was 16. The snow was falling on his furniture and his stuff out in the street. And he said he'd never take the record player, but he did. A week before Christmas, he took the record player. It was my worst nightmare. And his friend, Freddie Campbell, was standing out there in the snow. And he spun the chair around with the doors open. And he said, if you want me to go, I'll go. If you want me to stay, I'll stay. And I said, Dad, I just want the fighting to stop. And he said, right. And off he went. There was nothing I could have said that would have kept him in our home. There was no right answer. And when he seen me coming after that, if he seen me coming down the street, he would cross the street. And it wasn't until I had children, that was 10 years later, that he began to come back into my life. And then when I had a record on the radio, he showed up with newspaper clippings and told me I was successful because I had his name. I guess we all share the big ego thing in the Houston family. And I had never once said to him how I felt about him. I never once wanted to jeopardize the little relationship that we had. But in that moment, when I realized this is how you made me feel as a child, I was able to tell him exactly what I really thought of him, even though he's been dead many years, even though there was only me in the house by myself. I was able to I don't know if I spoke it out. To be honest, I was so caught up in the moment. I don't know if I said the words physically out loud or if I thought them, but I do know that I was completely immersed in the experience when I confronted him and called him all the names I could think of. Every swear word I could imagine. I gave him a full list of all the ways in which he let me down as a dad. And for the first time in my life, when I was done with that, I don't know how long it took, but for the first time in my life, I began to cry about my father. And I could suddenly connect to the anger and the pain. And I cried sore. It wasn't just like boohoo, it was full on ugly crying and mucus and water everywhere. And when I opened my eyes, I guess 10, 15 minutes later, the carpet beneath me had changed colour. And at that point, I then began to forgive him. And I began to say, Dad, I forgive you. I release you. I cancel your debts. And you owe me nothing. And there's an old hymn that says, my chains fell off, my heart was free. And I honestly had that experience. Something broke off me. Something fell to the ground. The sky got bigger, the air got fresher, and I could breathe. And I felt a release. And I kept on forgiving him until I couldn't forgive him anymore. And that was an amazing experience, but I had no grid for that. I had no idea what to do next. And what actually happened was, it was like someone peeled off a suit of armour, and there was just my vulnerable self. Because as I understand it, psychologically, when you're deeply wounded, your subconscious, I guess, or something within your system, operating system, puts a band-aid over the wound. It puts scar tissue, as if you'd cut yourself. Right? I've got some scars here from when I was a carpenter, where I missed with a saw and hit myself. And it puts scar tissue over those emotional wounds. And that's where the numbness comes from. Because it's easier to be angry and to be numb than it is to hurt. But once I forgave, I didn't have the anger as a protection mechanism anymore. I didn't have the rage to come in like the 7th Cavalry and rescue me. It was just me, naked and vulnerable. And to be honest with you, I thought I was going to lose my mind, because all of a sudden I could feel everything. I could hear everything. I could feel on a depth like I'd never felt. Well, I hadn't felt since my system put scars over everything. And I thought, after a couple of months of this, there was TV shows that I'd watched, like there's a scene in Vikings when Ragnar Lothbrok leaves his family and his son goes after him. And I couldn't watch that, even though I'd watched it twice before. I couldn't watch it anymore. The pain of seeing that separation was excruciating. And it got so bad that I would weep at the drop of a hat. I would weep in coffee shops. I'd weep anywhere I went. I just wept. And for a guy who never cried before that, I was the guy that didn't cry. All of a sudden, as Chandler says, I'd opened a gate, and there was no way I was stopping it. And I literally thought I was going crazy. And I eventually contacted my therapist and arranged a session. I explained what happened, and she said, that's a miracle. What happened to you is a miracle. And no one could have done that. No words could have led you there. That's a miraculous thing that happened. And she also said, but you will stabilize. This is normal, what you're going through. But don't be afraid, because you will stabilize. And almost like her saying that from that day on, things began to improve, and I was no longer worried about going crazy. But ever since then, in the last 2.5 years, I've been learning what it is to feel, what it is to hurt, what it is to be disappointed, what it is to be wounded, what it feels like to be betrayed, to be lied about, to be misunderstood, what it is to be loved, what it is to love, what it is to be welcome, what it is to be embraced, and what it is to be rejected. I've had to learn how to navigate all those feelings, because prior to that breakthrough, all I had was anger. And all of a sudden I had a rainbow of emotions that were all brand new to me as an adult. And truthfully, every once in a while, the 5-year-old gets up off the bench and says, "Put me in, coach. It's time for me to take this one. And, let me slam the doors and walk out. Let me throw the head up. Let me tear the house down. Let me burn the house down. Let me wreck the relationship." And I have to say to the 5-year-old, it's okay. I've got this. And allow the adult me to approach things from a more balanced perspective. And the fruit of it is, I'm much better at forgiving. I'm much better at apologizing. I know what it is to regret and to feel remorse, to feel shame. I know what it is to understand what it's like to be a grown-up adult human being, not a 5-year-old with a temper and a tantrum in an adult body. And the reason I'm sharing this with you is because many of us think that the person we're dealing with is all there is, and it's all there'll ever be. But my family, and my wife in particular, can tell you that things can change. Things will change. There is hope. You are not alone. You are not condemned. And there is a way out for you if you want it. So thank you for listening. I know it's a bit of a long video, but I hope this brings you some hope and perhaps even some healing. Thank you. See you.